Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. We're doing the summertime little podcast snacks. So hopefully this will be about 15 minutes. But before, I just want to jump on and thank you to everyone who reached out. Let me know how much you liked the podcast episode 2 episodes ago about what happens when I don't get results in 1 to 3 visits. Really appreciate the feedback. I'm glad it resonated with so many of you. And just a quick update, the athletes I was talking about, they're both doing well. We're not fully 100%, but we're I think out of the weeds and on a good track with them. So I am looking forward to sharing more about at least one of the cases with you all, because it's been super interesting, and definitely want to share it. So I just want to give a little update. The other update is we are officially 2 months away from the next in-person LTAP Level 1 course. It will be in San Diego. There's only 5 spots left in that course. And that kicks off the sort of end of the year, third, fourth quarter in-person courses. So if you've been wanting to come to an in-person course, now is the time to register to make sure you save your spot. So like I said, only 5 spots left in that San Diego course. And then in October, we've got a course in Toronto, Canada. And then in November, course in San Antonio, Texas. So there are still, I think, quite a few spots available in both of those as well. And then that's it for 2025. So once the summer starts winding down, those courses fill up really fast. So definitely don't drag your feet, because I don't want you to miss. I don't want you to miss not getting in the course until 2016 or 2026. So yeah, that's my other update too is because somebody recently asked me, I will be doing the annual birthday flash sale on all of the self-paced online courses. That will be January 29th to August 1st. So if you're not on the email list, that's gonna be the best place to find out about the sale and be reminded of the sale and have access to the sale, because this day and age, you cannot count on social media to show you the content always. I don't know about you, but lately I feel like on Instagram, the majority of my feed is ads, which is annoying for me as a consumer. I guess as someone who runs ads, I'm okay with that. But sheesh, so many ads. And I know y'all don't always see the posts on social, so being on the email list is really the best way to stay up to date with all the content, all the education, all the sales, all the things. So that you can always sign up for the email list. That is always in the show notes. So make sure you're there. All right, so today's episode, we're going to be talking about the duodenum or duodenum. Everybody pronounces it differently. Duodenum, duodenum. I like duodenum. It sounds cooler. Duodenum makes more sense in terms of exactly how it's spelled. Regardless of what you call it, the duodenum is the very beginning of the small intestine. And why I want to talk about the duodenum is because I've had a handful of athletes come to me, and the body is directing me to the duodenum. So I'm like, okay, guess we're talking about the duodenum. And interestingly enough, these athletes, they all had different main complaints, but all interestingly in the left lower extremity. And we're going to learn that that is not a common visceral referral for the duodenum, but it's going to make sense of why the body led us there. Well, maybe not why the body led us there, but it's going to make sense of why once we were led there, treating the duodenum made such a difference for their complaints. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. So let's just dive into it. The duodenum, like I said, the beginning of the small intestine. So it starts as soon as we exit the stomach. So the exit of the stomach is called the pylorus. That is the beginning of the duodenum. There is a sphincter there, sphincter muscle there that, is in charge of regulating how often the stomach dumps into the small intestine. That is the pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter, you can find it. It changes based on how full your stomach is, where it's at. But in general, it tends to be fairly midline. The easiest way to find it is to find your xiphoid process and then slide your finger down. And it's like from the xiphoid process, the first little mound that you run into, that is usually right where the pylorus is. And then from there, the small intestine tube, it's fairly superficial, like anterior there. I don't want to say superficial. It's fairly anterior there. And then it dives obliquely posterior to the edge of the lumbar spine. So I'm getting ahead of myself. The duodenum is the most fixed part of the small intestine. The rest of the small intestines, which is the jejunum and the ileum, are loops. That is like the bulk of the small intestine. Those are very loose. I have a whole podcast episode on the loops of the small intestine and the root of the small intestine. And I'll have Joe link that in the show notes. I think the title of that was like something about the mesenteric roots. But so the duodenum, the beginning of the small intestine, is the most fixed part of the small intestine. And so it's going to be kind of a high payoff area. But once you learn the anatomy, you're also going to be like, oh, no wonder treating the duodenum can be so powerful. So the fixed sections of the duodenum, they're kind of in like an incomplete circle. And so they're referred to in 4 sections. I guess an incomplete circle in 4 sections. You could also call it an incomplete square with rounded edges. Tomato, tomato. I don't care what shape you want to call it. But that's what the duodenum is. And so we refer to those sections as D1, D2, D3, D4. So D1 is this section I'm describing first. So it starts at the pylorus. It goes from anterior to posterior. So it runs 3-dimensionally oblique and slightly lateral, right? Because it starts midline or even on the left. So it's either midline or left of midline, anterior, and it goes posterior to the right side of the lumbar spine. Then that is section D1. And then section D2 is vertical, and it goes along the right side of the lumbar spine. Then D3 crosses the front. It's almost like U-shaped. The beginning of D3 is more posterior than the middle of D3. And so it kind of curves around the front of the spine, crosses the body of L4 as it goes from the right side of the spine to the left side of the spine. And then it goes again vertical, D4, and a little bit more left to the beginning of the loops, which is called the duodenal jejunal flexure, the DJ junction. And it flexes, it bends. A flexure is a bend in the tube, and it bends in the tube, and it goes back, and it gives rise to all of the loops of the small intestine. So to give you a little bit more visual context, if you're watching on YouTube, I got my spine here. So L5, L4, L3, L2, L1. It starts out around that area of L1. And it goes from the left side to the right side, just like this, and a little bit anterior. Because remember, we're talking about 3 dimensions. This is not just all flat, but it goes this way. And then as we go to D2, it comes along the lumbar spine. So down here to the body of L4, crosses the body of L4, and then comes back up to the D4 segment. Now, if that feels very low down on you on the model, it's because, yes, on models it does look very low down. But to give us some more context of where we are in space, if we take the top of the iliac crest, that's going to be L4. So it's going to be L3, L4, kind of depends on the person, but in general, that's like L3, L4. So it's going to be in the space above the pelvis. And we talk about this a lot in the missing link course and the results cheat code and the LTAP level 1 course, the area above the sacrum, the area above the ilium, that is the lumbar spine. And if we're looking at it from the front side of our body, it's more upper abdominal area, not lower down. It's more umbilicus and above. In general, our umbilicus, our belly button, tends to be around the level of L3. So it's like right at or slightly below the umbilicus and then above. Obviously, everybody's anatomy is a little bit different, but those are some general landmarks. The D2, the vertical part of the tube, is deep. It's to the depth of the spine. So even though we palpate it from the front and we locate it from the front, we have to think deep, not superficial. The parts of the duodenum, I think, that are easiest to treat and going to be sort of like where you really palpate them and really treat them is on the flexures, on the bends between like D1, D2. D1 as well is more mobile than D2. D4 is more mobile than D2 and D3. The D2 and D3 parts of the duodenum are fairly fixed. D1, D4, they are more mobile. Which makes sense because they're attached to things that are very mobile. D1 is attached to the stomach. It's pretty darn mobile. D4 is attached to the loops, also very mobile. Now, with that said, that means that with food in our stomach and with breathing, where we find these structures can be anywhere between 1 and 4 centimeters away from these normal locations. But why I wanted to show you the 3D-ness of this is because I also wanted you to appreciate how much this affects all the structures in our abdomen. So that is one of the cool things about the duodenum is the duodenum interacts or connects or is influenced by just about every single visceral organ in the abdomen, in the peritoneum. And so because of the way the suspensory ligaments are, it is like very much connected to our function of our core control, of our breathing mechanics, of our hip flexor function, hip flexor tightness, and blood flow throughout the body. So again, like I said at the beginning, very high payoff spot. The suspensory ligament that holds the duodenum and especially the more mobile parts of the duodenum to the spine is called the ligament of Treitz. And I've talked about the ligament of Treitz in that episode on the mesenteric root, as well as maybe the kidney episodes. So I'll make sure Joe links those in the show notes as well. And then I think I recently even did one on the colon and talked a lot about the ligament of Treitz and the relationship to fascia of Tolt. And so this is going to come in here too. So all of these tubes on the posterior abdominal wall share these fascial borders, these suspensory ligaments. And specifically, the suspensory ligaments of the ligament of Treitz connects us to the gastroesophageal sphincter and around the diaphragm. And so it really also sort of affects diaphragm function, which is going to mean that it's going to affect our thorax, our thoracic organs, our subdiaphragmatic organs, just our general breath capacity, our thoracic mobility, so many things. This is also likely part of the reason why, when we look at the duodenum, a classic associated skeletal fixation pattern is going to be at T7 and the costovertebral junction of rib 7. So those are things to look for in this area. In general, the visceral somatic reflexes that are going to be associated with the duodenum, right? I told you the anatomical location of the duodenum is between L1 and L4. That means L1, L2, L3, L4, any facet issue, any intervertebral disc issue, any like lumbar spine mobility thing can also be affected by the duodenum or vice versa affect the duodenum. This is why one of the most common things to come up when somebody comes in with like legit lumbar low back pain is the duodenum. But also the visceral somatic piece, which has more to do with where the nerves come from and where the vascular structures come from that innervate these organs. This is going to be from T6 to T10. So you're going to want to check the mid to lower thoracic spine for any facet restrictions, costovertebral joint restrictions as well, because these can all influence the mobility and function of the duodenum as well, and vice versa. The duodenum function and mobility can influence T6 through T10. And so we want to make sure we're always sort of covering our bases. This is why when we look at the direct visceral referral patterns of the duodenum, typically they're going to be right shoulder pain, scapular pain, mid thoracic pain, and upper abdominal or umbilical region pain. Those are the typical associated pains with the duodenum viscerosomatically. Seen a lot in just this world, low back pain. That's a number one, like I said, which makes sense knowing that anatomy and how it relates to the lumbar spine. And then also, it can be anywhere else, right? I talk about this a lot in so many episodes. I talk about like, why having assessment like the LTAP is important, because when our body is protecting a visceral organ like the duodenum, it's going to affect things throughout the spine from a like lumbopelvic control, from a dynamic alignment standpoint. I started this episode by telling you I've had a few athletes all in a row come up with the duodenum as where the LTAP was directing me. These athletes had left knee pain, left hip pain. Not normal associated referrals from the duodenum, but man, I treated their duodenum and their hip mobility on the left side changed a ton. And it's crazy too, because even though the duodenum does have parts that are towards the left side, right? The beginning of D1 can be towards the left side. The end of D4 is on the left, but the majority of the duodenum is on the right. So that is even so interesting that there is this left-sided component. But when we look at the suspensory ligaments and the relationships between the ligament of Treitz, fascia adult, the posterior abdominal wall, we also see that there is a direct relationship between the duodenum and the portal vein. So this oftentimes is a reason for left hip, left lower extremity issues, swelling issues. There is a connection to the right lobe of the liver, the vena cava So again, blood flow, both the left and the right psoas, the kidneys on the right as well as the left. So many structures that then we already know from either previous episodes or here I'm telling you right now, when we have things that are affecting blood flow, kidneys, hip flexors, we're going to have lower extremity issues all day long. So now you can see how the duodenum, though typically associated with lumbar spine problems, back pain, and upper extremity stuff or neck, right? Mid thorax, traditional viscerosomatic referrals from that upper abdominal peritoneum relationship that I've talked about in so many episodes. But you also see how it's going to be relating to the lower extremity from this connection via the pelvic bowl, the distension of the fluid balance, the tightness of the hip flexors, the QL tightness that's associated with it, right? This relationship to the posterior abdominal wall and even the diaphragm. So many connections. I have them all. I'm like, I don't even know. Do I read all the connections? I'm kind of telling you all of them, but it's like I said at the beginning, it's literally connected to everything. And each section of the duodenum is related to different things. So instead of talking more about the anatomy, let's make it practical. So it's like, how do you treat the duodenum? Well, like many things in the viscera, a really great way to treat them is through that connection to the colon. That's why I did a whole episode on the colon connection. The colon is easy access to affect the fascia of Tolt and then many of the things that connect to the fascia of Tolt, much like the small intestine, especially when we're trying to mobilize or affect the D2 segment of the duodenum. Going in from the lateral side. So doing the sideline visceral self-massage or the cortisol is a really great way to do that, especially utilizing the right side. And then also being able to find these various sphincters or flexures with anatomical alignments and do skin lifts in the area. Do a general lift of even the mesenteric root and the loops of the small intestines, like pulling it out from our belly, letting our belly descend, affecting the area of the posterior lateral, like breathing, like diaphragm stuff, right? I have a whole episode on the diaphragm, practical application, like mobility too. So, these can all affect the duodenum quite a bit. Addressing any sort of skeletal fixations between T6, T10, and L1 and L4. It's going to have an effect on the small intestine as well. So treating through the skin above the area of the duodenum is really powerful due to the effect of Hilton's law, as well as just treating from a diaphragm standpoint or a general visceral standpoint, super powerful. I think most of the time, practically, the hardest thing is like why I created it is like knowing when to treat the duodenum. Like, how do I know that someone's left hip pain or left hip function is being affected by the duodenum? How do I know that their back pain is being affected by the duodenum? Using the inhibition test that I teach in the LTAP is a great way. You know, starting even like with the free course I teach, the missing link, you know, learning how to assess the SI joint and utilizing the breath hold to let us know when there's a visceral issue. Like, then we just start targeting the visceral organs that are going to be more associated with these things. But spoiler alert, hopefully these episodes, when I talk about all these connections, show you why even very general things focus on the viscera can be so powerful. So, yeah, duodenum, so powerful. Let me take a real quick look to make sure we're not missing anything I wanted to say. Oh, The other thing that I think is important, and a lot of people love kind of seeing this piece, is like the emotional piece that sometimes is connected to our organs. So often, people with duodenal stuff, especially people with low back pain that happen to be duodenal, tends to be a very high level of anxiety or frustration associated with them. But then, too, some other emotions that can be associated with the duodenum and stomach is the relationship of yourself to society. And so like that is just like some like societal social anxiety or social concerns, you know, of like who you are to everyone else. But frustration is a big one for the duodenum. So that's it. Beginning of the small intestine, real powerful spot along the lumbar spine. If you see someone with like very limited lumbar mobility, think, I wonder how their duodenum is doing, and like how can we stretch the duodenum? How can we give some space in there? Maybe it is like going into left side bending to really stretch the tube on the right. Maybe it's right-sided visceral mobilization. Maybe it's a little bit of added rotation to get the lower part of the duodenum. Maybe it's going into extension. Just exploring, maybe doing skin stretch or skin stimulation just around those areas. So around the umbilicus, underneath the xiphoid process, a little bit more right-sided than left. Those are all really great places to start. And be curious. How does it change someone's hip mobility? How does it change someone's lumbar spine mobility? How does it change someone's diaphragm function and thoracic mobility? That's what it's all about. Hopefully this is helpful for you. Sorry, it's a little longer than I wanted, but it's because I did those updates at the beginning. See you next week. Have a great week. Bye.